Have you ever just felt stuck? Like in your career and your life, you're just not making the kind of progress you really want? It's a super common feeling. But what if I told you it's probably not a personal failing? What if it's a software problem? Yeah, a problem with your brain's default operating system. Okay, let's get into it.
You know that feeling, right? It's like being on a hamster wheel. You're putting in all the effort, you're making changes here and there, but the results are just tiny. You're getting 1% better, but what you're really looking for is that massive breakthrough. This feeling of stagnation, that's what we're going to deconstruct today.
And this really gets to the heart of the issue. On one side, you've got incremental change, just making small tweaks to what's already there. And on the other, you have breakthrough innovation, creating something completely new. Now, the truth is, most of us and most companies spend all our time on the left side of this equation. And there's a really specific reason why. It's a default way of thinking that keeps us trapped. We're calling it the analogy trap. Think of it like the default software that runs automatically in the background of your mind. Our brains absolutely love it because it's easy, it saves a ton of mental energy, it's fast, it feels safe, and it's probably the single biggest reason most people and businesses stay stuck in a loop of just being okay. So what exactly is reasoning by analogy? Well, at its core, it's basically copying. It's looking at how something's been done before and just making little tweaks. And, psychologically, this feels really safe. It's social proof, right? If everyone else is doing it this way, it must be the right way. The problem is, when you only copy, you can never, ever create something truly new. You're just remixing the past. I mean, just look at these phrases. I bet they sound pretty familiar, right? Have you ever said one of these or heard them in a meeting a million times? Oh, we're going to be the Uber for dog walking. Or the classic, well, this is just how it's always been done. These are all giant red flags that you or your team are caught in the analogy trap. And here's the danger. When you're stuck in that trap, you inevitably start thinking like the crowd. You're playing the exact same game by the exact same rules as everyone else. And when you do that, guess what? You're signing up for average results. You are literally choosing mediocrity. This quote just nails it. A way to mediocrity and stagnation. Reasoning by analogy puts a hard ceiling on your potential. It basically guarantees that your best case scenario is just a slightly better version of what someone else already built. It is the direct path to being a copy, not a creator. And this brings us to a really critical idea: form versus function. Think about it this way. For centuries, people tried to build a better suitcase by improving its form, a stronger handle, a lighter material. They were stuck on the idea of a box you carry. They weren't thinking about the function, which is just, how do I move my stuff around easily? The minute someone focused on the function, the solution was blindingly obvious: put wheels on it. So if analogy is the default software that leads to mediocrity, what's the upgrade? Well, there's an incredibly powerful mental model called first principles thinking. It's about deleting that old, buggy programming and installing a totally new way of seeing the world. And this right here is the key. It's a two-step process. You deconstruct, and then you reconstruct. But let's be real, this is mentally exhausting. It requires you to question everything and have the guts to challenge what everyone else takes for granted. That's why so few people actually do it. First, you break a problem all the way down to the fundamental truths you know for sure. Then, and only then, do you start building a new solution from that solid foundation. This visual just captures the idea so perfectly. You take a complex structure, a problem, a belief, an entire industry, and you peel back all those layers of assumption, of tradition, of how things are always done, until you're left with nothing but the essential building blocks. And from there, you're free to build something completely new. And look, this isn't some new age productivity hack. This way of thinking has been the secret weapon of some of the greatest minds in history. Aristotle used it to figure out how we know things. Descartes used it to prove his own existence. And today, innovators like Elon Musk are using it to do things that literally everyone else said was impossible. Okay, so let's see how this actually works in the real world with a truly mind-blowing example. The story of SpaceX is probably the most famous modern case study of first principles in action, and for good reason. So the goal was, well, audacious is an understatement. Around 2002, Elon Musk decided he wanted to send a rocket to Mars. Simple goal, right? Except for one tiny multi-million-dollar problem. The problem was the cost. If you reasoned by analogy the normal way, you'd go to the existing rocket companies and ask for a price. And they'd tell you it costs a staggering $65 million, or even more. At that price, Musk's whole plan was dead in the water. It was simply impossible.
This right here, this is the pivot. This is the moment everything changed. Instead of accepting that insane price tag, Musk asked a first principles question. A question so simple it's almost childish, but absolutely profound. What is a rocket actually made of? He refused to look at the final product and decided to deconstruct the whole problem.
So he did the research. He figured out what a rocket is made of at the most fundamental level. Not assembled parts, not complex systems, but the raw ingredients, the absolute basic truths of what goes into a rocket. And this is the punchline. When he priced out the raw materials on the commodity market, he discovered something that is just unbelievable. The raw materials cost only about 2% of a finished rocket's typical price. Let that sink in. 2%. This discovery didn't just lead to a small improvement. It completely blew the old model to pieces and proved it was possible to build a rocket for a tiny fraction of the accepted cost.
Now, the SpaceX story is incredible, but this isn't just for building rockets. You can apply the same powerful way of thinking to your career, your health, your relationships, any complex problem you're facing. So let's break down a simple, practical framework you can start using today.
It really boils down to these 3 steps. First, identify your assumptions. Just list out everything you think is true about the problem. For example, to get fit, you might assume you must have a gym membership. Okay, step 2, deconstruct. Ask why over and over again. Why a gym? To use equipment. Why equipment? To build muscle. What's the fundamental truth here? Your body needs resistance and an elevated heart rate. That's a fact. And finally, step 3, rebuild. From those core truths, you can build a new solution. Maybe it's just bodyweight exercises at home or running in a park. You've now broken free from the old, expensive assumption. Now, this is super important. First principles thinking takes a lot of brain power. You don't need to use it for deciding what to have for lunch. As you can see here, analogical reasoning, the easy stuff, is perfectly fine for stable situations or low-stakes decisions. But when the stakes are high, when you're in a changing industry, or you're making a big life decision, you have to switch over to first principles thinking if you want a breakthrough result. So, at the end of the day, this is the big takeaway. If you want to make small improvements, if you want to stay on the same path as everyone else, reasoning by analogy is your tool. But if you want to find a completely new path, if you want to shatter mediocrity and create something truly new, you have to think from first principles.
So I'll leave you with a question to chew on. In your work, in your life, what's one of those obvious truths that everyone just accepts without question? What if it isn't a law of nature, but just an old assumption you inherited from someone else? Because challenging that one belief, well, that might just be the key to getting you unstuck for good.